everyone. Welcome to our edition of The View. I get to play Rosie O'Donnell, so watch out. I'm looking for my Elizabeth Hasselbeck. We'll see who it is. Thank you for joining us. We've got a great panel of education technologists and education leaders. So I'll actually turn it over to each of you to briefly introduce yourself. I'll start with you, Elijah.
Hi there. My name's Elijah. I work with GSV Ventures, really doing a lot of work with the early stage startups in AI. My PhD is in natural language processing from Carnegie Mellon. I've worked at a lot of different organizations, such as Turnitin, partnerships with the Gates Foundation and the College Board. I taught at the University of Pennsylvania, so I've sort of been in a lot of different things, but focused on the early stage of AI startups right now.
Yeah, my name is Quddus Pativada. I'm the founder and CEO of ASI. So we work with governments as well as build directly consumer-facing tools to essentially emulate human tutors. So we've been using artificial intelligence for the last 3 years to build personal AI tutors that can understand you as a student, profile you, and then tailor itself to your strengths and weaknesses.
Good afternoon, Isabelle. I'm the executive director of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. And our mission is to accelerate research-anchored solutions to the most pressing issues facing learners.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lev Gonick, ASU's Chief Information Officer. I have in my remit trying to orchestrate and coordinate ASU's AI strategy, and I look forward to sharing some of that today.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm Stephen Butschi. I'm the director of our education team for Google in North America. And thank you for joining us. And I'll kick it off. They kind of set us up with the title of this session around whether AI will be the world's greatest learning accelerator. And before AI, I'm curious if each of you were to answer that question 2 years ago, what would you say the world's greatest learning accelerator was at that point? Side note, I asked this to another individual, and they said the school bus, which I thought was interesting. But if there are any takeaways from that piece of process or technology that we could apply to implementing AI, I'd also be interested in hearing that. So I'll kick it off with you, Elijah, the world's greatest learning accelerator pre-AI.
I think a lot of people trash the 20th century school classroom and the way students learned in a classroom. But if you look prior to that, prior to, say, this turn of the 20th century, children were really seen as sort of just defective little adults. And the adoption of developmental psychology, of Lev Vygotsky's work, of all of the work on student learning, not even student-child learning, from, say, 1880 to 1960, was a massive change in how children were thought about, how they developed, how they thought about learning, and it really did revolutionize it. In the 20th century classroom, compared to anything that came before, it really was a massive revolution in the way that children learn and were given access to education. So I think it doesn't get the credit it deserves.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. When I think about the world's greatest learning accelerator, I don't know if you guys have watched Silicon Valley, the TV show, but I started to think about horse poop. So in 1847, there was the Great London Crisis of manure. So horses were the main form of transportation, and the biggest problem in London was there was too much manure on the streets. So the prediction was that by the end of the decade, there would be over 9 feet of manure, so you wouldn't be able to walk past. A couple of years down the line, before the end of the decade, the car was invented, and all of a sudden the manure problem disappeared overnight. I think when I look at AI and our sort of philosophy for building in the space for the last 3 years is, I think so far, and I agree with the classroom. I think there's the traditional accelerators like the classroom, the printing press, the textbook. But I think today we're in an opportunity where instead of building the shovels for the manure, which is what I think has been done at least in the 21st century, I think now we have the opportunity to build a car, and I think that's what AI gives us the opportunity to do. I don't know if we're there yet with the tools we have today, but I think there is potential to completely reimagine the way we learn from a first principles perspective. Does a classroom look the same? Do assignments look the same? Does anything look the same anymore for students? And I think the bet that I think most of us at the conference are trying to make is 10 years from now it looks completely different. Yeah.
Great point. I didn't expect we were going to talk about horse poop on our panel today, so that was great. Isabelle.
Actually, I will stay in the vicinity of TV shows. I don't know if it's the world's greatest accelerant, but one of the great accelerants of the past few decades to me has been Sesame Street, where we now have 100 million of children who have watched these TV shows, and many of us have learned English through that TV show. Certainly I did. So to me, this is one example of a solution that was actually federally funded initially, has been accessible for free to millions of children, and has really impacted lives in a meaningful way and continues to do so with their expansion in refugee camps right now.
It's a great point. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, who's your favorite character on Sesame Street, Isabelle?
Grover.
Grover. Perfect. Lev.
So let me just offer to you that if you want to, I'll just build on this sort of historical framework for just a second. There's a project that ASU and a group of collaborators, some of whom are in the room, have been working on for the last year or so called the 100-Year Tech Project. You want to take a look at 100yeartechproject.org. You'll sort of see our version of this first part of some of the great learning accelerators. Let me offer you a way to kind of bridge from some of that earliest moments and pick up where Elijah left off. He sort of said in the 60s. That's kind of where his story ended. I do think, just briefly, that in many ways, the moment that we're living in has an analogous moment in time, which I think many of you in the room will be able to relate to. And that is, you'll probably remember where you were in the fall of 1993 when we got the Mosaic browser, the predecessor to Netscape, and the first web experience. And what was that? There was a time when I was teaching online with tools that were like Archie, or Gopher. There was a way to actually get to files with tools that today seem completely arcane and quaint. And then we had a window into the opportunity to actually begin to have a way of organizing all of those files, massive scale, in a way that had historically never been possible along the way. Along from that then became a logical next step, which could you search the files? And that became search. And today we're at a moment in time where, again, I think we're at each of those were enormous accelerators for the ability to learn both individually and to reorganize our institutions and organizations to accomplish that. And today we're at, I believe, a similar moment in time, because AI, for those of you, I'm sure everyone in the room knows, as a subject has been around for really 55 or 60 years worth of important work, but we've never had a window into it. And this sort of our analogous moment right now is that with generative AI, we're at the very beginning of an opportunity to go into that window. So in our 100-year project, we see this as more continuity than disruption.
It's a great point on the acceleration. I think Michael Moe last year was talking about, in order to get 50 million users within generative AI tools, it took about 5 weeks. Compare that to the internet, it took 7 years. Or Facebook to get to 50 million users was, I think, 3 years. We had a similar panel last fall. In the last 6 months, and feel free, any of you, to jump in, what do you think has been the biggest advancement to the window that you're mentioning that you've seen in generative AI or AI generally as it relates to education?
Yeah, I'm going to take this. I think, 6 months in the generative AI world feels like 6 years, right? Like the amount of innovation you're seeing, I think everybody struggles to keep up with it. I think in the last 6 months, we're seeing optimizations happen. I think there hasn't been an aha moment, at least in textual AI. I think what you're seeing is AI becoming faster, cheaper. I think you're seeing inference go faster with Grok and the new chips that are coming out. I think you're seeing the ability to deploy models become safer. I think there's been a lot more advancements in the physical world, with AI relating to robotics and physical intelligence, which I think is very interesting if that was able to be tied into to education. But I think what we're in the phase now is optimization, at least for the rest of the world. I think OpenAI and the rest of them will focus on AGI, but we're just seeing things get faster, cheaper, and really better monumentally.
I think the other thing that I've seen compared to October when we last talked about this, at that time, every tech person in San Francisco knew about AI, had to use ChatGPT. Every early adopter at every place that I've been to had already started using it. But now it's gone past that. And now everybody, even the people that didn't want anything to do with AI, are seeing AI come into their life. It's showing up in the articles they read online and their news feeds on social media. It's become, gone from something that 100% of tech people were using in the fall to now it's everywhere, for better or worse.
Can I build on that? Oh, go ahead, Lev and Isabelle.
So I was just only going to add that when we last had the conversation, just to pick up again on Elijah's point here, in the spring, a year ago, right now, at ASU, again, one of the more innovative universities in the land, the question was actually anyone going to be using the tool? And it turns out my view was, well, let's just go find out from our students. And we found out that in the exam period, which starts 2 weeks Monday, a year ago, 43,000 students had actually been using ChatGPT during the 4 days of the exam period. So it turns out what's happened in the last year, a little bit longer than the 6-month window here, is that the institutional view is it's well overdue now to realize that there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, not really worth having much of a debate at policy levels as to whether or not you should or you shouldn't. It's really rather how you're going to do it. And again, we've left some propaganda on the tables in front of you. The journey that we've been on here is to institutionally engage across the full breadth with 5,300 faculty, 180,000 students, more than right now 350 programs. How do we all lean in because of it if we are right, and this is a window into the future, ASU's longstanding ambition about supporting students' success, this is the opportunity to actually drive that much deeper and to really try to do it in, I think, a very holistic way. Not only buying and using commercial products, but actually building together platforms and applications across the breadth of what everyone would hope a great university would work on.
Isabelle.
If I may add two other things over the past year that I'm really excited about, and specifically to AI and education. So one is an extraordinary move of existing districts, academic institutions, countries that are actually launching their own AI tools. This is unprecedented in EdTech. EdTech, education technology, previously was really much more driven by private sector actors driving the agenda. For the first time, what I'm seeing with whether it's New York City, whether it's LAUSD with their new chatbot, whether this is the UAE with their chatbot as well, this big movement of whether it's at the country level or at the district level of institutions driving change, which is quite interesting. And then the second thing that I love is a big move toward omni-model. So we have seen a lot of announcements on whether it's on video, on NLP and voice inputs. Anyway, like a lot of integration between VR and AI that are emerging, that are quite cool.
Yeah, some of the demos around the multimodal capabilities are pretty impressive. Elijah, building on it, it actually builds what you were saying, Lev, too, and the usage of this. Some people have come up to me at the summit and said, we're too focused actually at this conference on teachers using AI or professors using AI, and not as much on students using AI. Building on your experience at Turnitin and Lightside Labs, where you were helping develop writing and coaching for students directly, do you feel like we're ready to unleash AI for students directly? Or if we're not, why not? And if we are, what considerations from a safety perspective, ethical, et cetera, should we be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think to Lev's point, you say unleashed. That implies that it's leashed right now, and
Fair.
and that we have the leash and that we're holding it. And I think that's a real misread of the situation. I think that many of the people that are at ASU+GSV are coming from an ed tech and an industry that is used to technology being driven by sales from vendors to institutions, from startups to districts. But this is a real moment in the same way that the late 90s, early 2000s were, where individual users are driving the adoption and usage of a lot of these tools. And I think that the organizations that are here at ASU+GSV that understand that it is really the students, the teachers, the parents, individual people on their phones or on their laptops potentially, they're the ones that are choosing what AI-powered technologies they're adopting, and they're choosing it very quickly. And teenagers, every 17-year-old is well ahead of most universities in adoption. And so wrapping your head around that and really building your strategy around a world where the adoption by consumers is driving this wave forward, is defining sort of the winners of this generation of startups, it looks very different from, say, 5 or 10 years ago, where it was more of an institutional decision-making process.
Elijah, could just sort of build on that, because it seems to me we have to hold two truths at once. The truth that you've just finished articulating, which I had previously outlined, which is to try to meet our students where they are, and at the same time, and not before or not after, but at the same time, trying to work with the providers of these very powerful foundational models to wrap around them the required security infrastructure that will then enable the trust that needs to be actually, again, become part of the confidence that everything from PII to institutional IP to any number of other challenges that, again, institutionally we need to move on. We need to find a way to work not seriatim, but in parallel. And parallel processing is actually something that we, especially technologists, should know kind of how to begin working on that, especially when you're trying to get to scale. So I think one of the major issues here is the mindset. Are you prepared to work in parallel processing at scale, or are you waiting somehow for a quote-unquote logical sequence? First it has to be safe, secure, and all things, and then we're just going to be telling students, be careful. Or are we actually trying to work in parallel? So I've said yesterday at a roundtable with investors, this is an enormously exciting moment for you to be investing in companies that want to begin solving the solution and building bridges between where our students are and what our institutions need to have in order to be fiduciaries and compliant with regulations and things of that sort. It's a fantastic opportunity, especially if you want to run fast, especially with ASU.
It's a good point that you both are bringing up, is that where are we meeting users where they are, and it's not leashed, you're right. Quddus, I'm curious, you've been working on AI tutors, and Isabelle, you mentioned the multimodal aspects of the next generation of generative AI. What are you finding? And I always think about a lot of these tutors have a chat-based interface, and is that going to be the equivalent of like the command line interface of the 1980s, the MS-DOS of the 1990s, or do you think that we're going to engage with AI in many different ways?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think on a foundational level, I think conversation is a really useful tool for learning. I mean, if you think about how you learn best, it is usually through this interactive conversation. I do think the chat interface itself will look very different. So at ASI, we're creating generative interfaces that essentially mold the interface to what the student wants. So when the time is right, we pull up a quiz, or we'll take them to an immersive game where they're playing a game about pyramids when they're learning about history. So I think the interface itself is really the only bottleneck to students' usage today. But I think more importantly, one of the things we spend a lot of time on, I think is a worthwhile exercise in AI, is not thinking about how students are accessing the AI, but how could we give the ability for the AI to access the student. So we built personalized language models, profiling models that are able to understand the student really intricately, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. I think that's a really powerful exercise, because AI is really powerful, but 30 years ago, textbooks were really powerful, but it didn't make the entire population 10 times smarter. I think one of the biggest problems in education, and I was a student not too long ago, I'm only 20 years old, so I spent 85% of my life being a student. I think the biggest problem is always motivation, right? Like you have a really powerful technology in front of you, or you had a really great book in front of you, but how do you convince someone to sit down and read it? And I think this is the first time we're giving these textbooks the power, not just for students to open them, but for textbooks to understand the student. Can we mold a textbook to how a student best learns? Are we using the right analogies to convince them? Or if they're a fan of the Patriots, can we use an analogy of the Patriots? I think that's a really powerful exercise, and I think the accessibility goes both ways. But in terms of the specific modalities, I would imagine that conversation still continues. I think the specific chat interface itself will, if we do our job, I think it'll change pretty drastically over the next few months. But I do believe that conversation is a really useful tool for learning. That's my personal belief.
You raise an interesting point there. You're talking about the way that we can personalize with it and the power that it has. I was talking with a student last week, and they said, generative AI provides immense power. It can also lead to immense laziness. How do we ensure that students are still learning the foundational skills that they need, and they're not just putting everything into generative AI, or maybe to be contrary, maybe this is where the Elizabeth Hasselbeck moment comes out, to be contrarian, do we even need to teach those foundational skills? Because technology's there, it can solve it for us.
Yeah, I think the latter question you asked is the right question. I mean, I don't think it will completely make students lazy, right? I think, today we live in a world where Duolingo and Google Translate coexist. Just because you have the power to translate everything doesn't mean the skill set of actually speaking a different language is useless. Calculators exist, but people still know how to do math. I think less than what we used to do, but at the end of the day, I think the tools are a form of accessibility. I think the education, and that's why I spoke about horse poop earlier, is because I do think the system needs to start thinking about how to reimagine the way students learn and what students learn. I think that's incredibly important. That's one of the reasons we work with governments at an institutional level, is trying to help governments. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it, but I do think there is a real concern even for myself that so when I was in high school, one of the biggest things I learned, one of the biggest takeaways I had was getting better at writing, and today that's helped me immensely. Where I write memos in the company, or I'm writing emails, and I notice that my emails are slightly more articulate than other people's emails. And will that skill set go away? I think that's a question to be answered probably better suited by people like Lev, who've been in the institutions and are in control of that. But I do think there is a fundamental reimagination of what students are learning that needs to be done. And I think the skills will change. I think once skills start becoming obsolete, the case that a lot of people make, or a lot of the doomers make, is that students will no longer learn the skills. But the truth is, the skills that students will be learning will just get more and more advanced. As soon as calculators came out, math at a high level started getting harder and harder. So I think the argument I would make is the foundational skills will change, but I think they'll change for the better. I think once the hard stuff becomes easy, there'll be harder stuff for people to do. And I think you'll probably result in a net positive when that happens.
Isabelle, looks like you want to say something.
No, I love that optimistic view. We have data, and the data don't look good actually right now. They actually substantiate the quote that you got. So we at Stanford have this intro computer science class that's free for anyone to sign up for, and so it's run at with more than 10,000 people who sign up for this class. So we have a lot of data that we can garner from that class. And the data suggests that better learning outcomes, but less engagement. So laziness, the laziness question is definitely there. How do we continue thinking about a future where we engage our students with those tools as creators? And I love the future that you are describing, but it's not there.
Lev's going to solve it for us. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think, this is sort of all part of that 100-year project, that there is importance, again, to holding a lot of and both statements rather than sort of either or, yes, utopian, yes, dystopian. There's a lot of all of that is in play. And a lot of it comes back to our responsibility to be continuing to evaluate what does it mean to assess learning outcomes in an AI age. And if all we're doing is saying, well, it's not the same as it used to be, then the poverty of insight and imagination is ours, not on our students to actually take that burden. And I'll just kind of go back, and if it's all right, bridge to the previous question, which was around multimodality. And so at ASU, I think most of you will hopefully know that we have this fantastic, what we call Realm 4 project around discovery-based or experiential learning in the Dreamscape project. It's an XR, VR downstairs. You want to experience the biology classroom experience, you're welcome to do that. And that is kind of just the whole idea of actually finding ways to engage students so that they are motivated to actually learn what has historically been extremely complicated lab materials in biology. And we very much are working on, at this moment, on actually adding to that experience where they are already motivated and engaged, and we have all the data to show for it, both formatively and summatively, in terms of not only their engagement, but their performance as well, is to add to that the development of personalized tutor experience in world, which is to say, yes, you could do it through a dialogue box, you could do it through a voice, again, this now to the multimodal point, and we very much are working on prototyping. In fact, not only again, you'll see this if you go downstairs to take a run at the Dreamscape Learn environment, you are actually in world as an avatar. And so will your AI tutor in biology, and it will be your tutor. And actually, it's a permanent AI tutor in the sense that it actually stays with you not only in your biology course, but for all of your experience, should you choose to actually make that part of your learning journey. And our, again, hypothesis here, to be tested, to be sure, is that it is a way of maintaining the motivation of students and giving the idea of letting our students guide us as to how they were not making a single choice. But if you want to use the text-based engagement, you'll use text-based windows. And if you want to use voice, you'll use voice. And if you want to use essentially the avatar experience, you'll be doing that. And then if you want to, again, going forward, we're going to be into a spatial computing world out there, so there are going to be all kinds of interesting ways in which to be using yet additional things that we haven't yet figured out how to get fully integrated into our curriculum. I think all of this is in play here, and I think it's really important to debate them and have really insightful conversations about what the trade-offs are, but more than anything, hold these multiple truths and experiments where again, meeting fundamentally where our students are, but also guiding them through the opportunities to develop meaningful foundational knowledge for the again, era that they're going to inherit and not the ones that we actually grew up in ourselves.
May I just chime in on the word laziness, because I think that focuses in on a very particular corner of the world, the sort of, especially undergraduate or high school curriculum. How am I going to make sure students are writing essays that I assign to them? How do I know they're not cheating? But when I think about the context more broadly than that, I'm a parent and I know many other parents, and the children that I see, frankly, are busier than any children that I grew up with. They have more expectations on them in terms of extracurriculars, in terms of putting together a packet to get into preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then college. They have more expectations laid on them to reach a higher bar, to have peer-reviewed publications before they go to undergraduate. And then when you get into that undergraduate world, and then certainly postgraduate, and into the career world, affordability of all of these things and the amount of work that they have to do outside of a college classroom is again ramping up, and it's harder than ever to just make the balance between the classes you're taking, the homework you're doing, the rent you're paying, and everything else going on. Those burdens are, again, very complex and, frankly, more complex than they were when I was in college. And so certainly if you look at first-year composition and say, how do we make sure that the argumentative essays that we're teaching in September are being written by this student? Are they being lazy? If you really narrow it down that way, there's a conversation to be had for sure. But if you think about the experience of being a teenager, I think they're the least lazy teenagers I've seen in a long time.
It's a fair point.
Could I just add one more quick insight to Elijah's point here? So there is a sort of mainstream and high-achieving socioeconomic class that for which I think all of this is an interesting debate. But there's 50% of the world that actually does not have access and is not actually engaged with. And I don't think this is a matter of laziness at all. I see AI in its most I would say the most provocative way that we can think about it as one of the most radical democratizing opportunities since that earlier moment when those big filing cabinets of knowledge became retrievable with gets and puts and ultimately a browser along that journey. And it again, for the entrepreneurs in the room, and again, I think I'm speaking to the several of you in the audience here, it is a fantastic opportunity not only to be of service to the great and actually very well-to-do universities that are well-served and will do just fine, but also to be figuring out creatively how to engage with the next 50% of humanity and find ways of, again, motivating. This is not because this is an opportunity to shift the idea that you are in a cast and set for life in the opportunities of achieving your dreams and your aspirations. This is very much the technology that can unlock, I think, again, people who dream but don't feel that they have a way of getting there. I remember when, again, the MOOCs became a very big deal, and certainly at Stanford and many other places when people began actually offering access to the highest quality education that we had worldwide, it turns out that many, many outstanding learners ended up being in places that had never actually had any access to education in any meaningful way. And so you had study groups in villages in Pakistan taking MIT or Stanford courses. And when evaluated and assessed, the top 100 performers in the original work on AI that came out of Stanford were actually not Stanford students who were taking that class. It was people outside of it. So let's not be limited in again, and I know this was not your point, Elijah, but let's think as broadly as we possibly can for the disruptive moment that we sit at.
Well, you raised an interesting dynamic that there is such power to increase access and increase personalization of pathways and learning outcomes. But then you also mentioned the trade-offs. And Isabelle, every time I meet with you, I'm always fascinated because Stanford does such interesting research on what does Gen AI mean for cheating? What does it mean for students' mental health? What's the latest that's come out on some of these trade-offs that we need to be thinking about? What's the data telling us there?
Yeah, but sometimes that's what I love about research is that you look at data and then you see what the results show you, and sometimes very counterintuitive. So on your two topics that you just raised, we have very counterintuitive data. So on cheating, we had a group of faculty that had access to data in a school, in a network of schools pre-launch of ChatGPT, and then we looked at the data post since then. So we looked at comparison around cheating patterns. And here's a counterintuitive fact that those data suggest is that there has not been an increase in cheating behaviors.
Let that sit in, folks, because that is one of the great memes that's out there.
Yeah.
They're cheating before and they're cheating today.
They were cheating before and they are cheating today in different ways.
Yep.
So this entire conversation on cheating, I think, is interesting and probably not the most interesting one on this topic. On mental health, also very counterintuitive. So a team of faculty have looked at this tool called replica.ai that's used by 15 million plus people, young adults. And they looked at, so you can create an avatar. It was initially launched as more of a romantic platform where you can build your avatar and then you have discussion with this avatar for purpose of online romance. So they looked at this group of folks that have been using this platform for mental health. And what they are finding is that people actually are actually a meaningful reduction in suicidal ideation for people who are using that platform. So better mental health as a result of creating an online avatar and using those platforms. The other thing that I would just add quickly is what is more concerning as part of that research is that we are seeing a displacement, slight displacement in human connections. So people who are using this platform are not making as many friends and interacting with humans as peer groups. And then the last fact that I would mention, which is also fascinating, is that there is incredible confusion by people using the platform. So 90% of users are saying that they are human, that the platform is human-like. 90%. So this is really interesting in terms of where we are and our increasing confusion about what is human, what is machine, what is algorithm, and what is not, and the future of human connections.
It's fascinating between cheating, mental health, human connections, learner engagement that you were speaking about earlier, learning outcomes, so many different dynamics that are at play as we're figuring out how generative AI is leveraged within schools and universities. And Lev, I know you all at ASU have been really innovative in that forefront, and with your Create AI initiative, making those tools available in a secure way. Any of the thoughts that Isabelle just shared, have you been seeing that on campus as it relates to human connection, or conversely, were you seeing this is actually bringing a community together as they're using these tools in interesting ways that they weren't engaging before?
At ASU, we have a group of colleagues who very much like Isabelle's Accelerator for Learning. We have a center for learning engineering. They are likewise engaged in a lot of research activities. It's the collaboration, again, which is part of the little leave behind in front of you, outlines a lot of that collaboration across the campus. And a lot of the work that we are doing is engaging with faculty collaborators. There's actually over 1,700 faculty at ASU that have actually signed up for their own AI acceleration experience through 8 modules and actually being willing to share some of their own experiences in a way for us to basically understand that side of the equation. Again, there are plenty of assumptions out there and biases that faculty don't want to innovate and are scared. I'm not saying that that is not part of the reality, but there are literally a third of all of ASU's faculty signing up for this new technology. The last time we got even close to it, it was a forced march on March the 13th, 2020, to flip at COVID. It's the same proportion of faculty who are volunteering at this moment as opposed to the forced activities that are there. And on the student side and the classroom side, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of classes that are experimenting with this, and selectively we're working with the Learning Engineering Institute that is engaging with and helping us to try to measure that work. There's also a series of communities of practice which involve not only our faculty, but also student engagement on, again, what's going on. So the moment that we're living in is really early. You know, again, we're sort of just at the beginning of baseball season here. So let's just say we're really only at the bottom of the first inning in this work. But what is great about this, which really didn't exist back in my day when I was teaching with Gopher and Archie and that first fall of 1993, was from the beginning we're actually asking and measuring that kind of journey that we're all on together. And while we will have lots of important rhetorical debates, it's really, as we did then, and if you go all the way back to, again, the way that Elijah sort of framed the original classroom, there were lots of debates as if the world of learning or the moving our concepts of what children needed to be as little adults back then. That whole journey now is going to have measure, along with all of the rhetoric and information and disinformation that's going to inform the debate. And I think for that, we're all better off. But let's breathe. Bottom of the first inning. There's a long way to go on this journey. And our abilities to hold multiple truths, including contradictory insights, need to be held in order to move this whole project forward.
It is interesting. I was attending a CSU summit on AI, and one of the biggest requests from students was actually clarity on, during that process, what is cheating? In the syllabus, what can we use Gen AI for? What can we not use it for? And I think you're right. We're in that moment of trying to figure it all out, and there's a lot still to be worked out. Which leads me to our last question. We only have a couple minutes left. If any of you have any thoughts, are there any sacred areas where we should not touch? You know, we should say this is off limits to Gen AI or AI generally in education. We've got an optimistic panel here.
I think the most important thing to recognize is that, you know, as I keep harping on, it's not something that we all get to decide. It's something that is happening, and it's producing a real change in the quality of the content that you can find in any given place, because there's such a wide range of usages of all of these tools. And there are actors that are, you know, still very in a pre-AI world and are writing everything by hand manually. And there's actors that are using these tools in ways that, you know, the various steering committees would call ethical or responsible. And then there are actors that are producing 10 million articles this week and are going to produce it all and just sort of spew it everywhere. And I think that we need to be cognizant as we build out sort of content generation and the ability to sort of unleash as much generative AI as we want, that does produce a problem for sort of the commons, for the way that people access information. We now have a lot more work to do to sort of search through and sort and understand what's out there and say, was this produced by someone sort of artisanally by hand? Was this produced as part of a responsible AI practice? Or is this thing that's happening on social media or on the internet or live and in person, was this produced by an irresponsible actor? We don't get to decide whether those people do it or not. They've got the tools, they've got the servers, they've got the GPUs, but we do need to understand that it's happening and say we do or don't want to acknowledge that and then address it within our own communities.
It's a good way, unless there's a last thought, it's a good way to leave it. Oh, go ahead, Isabelle.
I was going to say humans in the loop.
Yeah.
And just say, I mean, it's all about our human agency. So again, there's not one answer for everybody here. The great news is that we get together once a year here to check in with each other, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody through the rest of this event and next year.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you all.